Hello everyone, welcome to my channel SW Metro official channel.
Janelle and Meri finally rejecting Kody's desperate proposal to reunite marks one of the most symbolic and emotionally charged turning points in the long and complicated saga of sister wives, a reality show that has documented the highs, lows, fractures, and implosions of the Brown family for over a decade, and in many ways, this moment represents not just a rejection of a man but a rejection of a way of life that has left two women scarred, exhausted, and finally empowered enough to say no to the person who once dictated the trajectory of their lives. Kody Brown, once the patriarch who insisted on unity, faith, and the idea of family above all else, approached Janelle and Meri in what many could see as an act of both desperation and nostalgia, longing to piece back together fragments of a plural marriage that had long since dissolved under the weight of betrayal, favoritism, jealousy, financial chaos, and emotional neglect, but instead of welcoming him back with open arms, instead of bowing to the pressure of a man who spent years placing his wants above their needs, Janelle and Meri stood their ground, showing that they had learned far too much and grown far too independent to fall back into the same trap, and in doing so, they offered viewers not just a personal victory but also a cultural one, as women in fundamentalist-inspired plural marriages often face extraordinary pressure to endure pain in the name of faith and family, yet here, in front of cameras that had once shown them crying, begging, or being ignored, they finally asserted a simple, powerful truth: they were done. This rejection did not come overnight, as anyone who has followed the series knows, but instead it was the culmination of years of tension, starting with Meri's catfishing scandal that revealed not just her yearning for attention but the deep cracks in her marriage, continuing with Janelle's slow-burning realization that her practical, business-focused nature could no longer coexist with Kody's controlling bursts of anger and favoritism toward Robyn, and ultimately building through countless seasons where Kody alienated child after child, dismissed his wife's feelings, and positioned himself less as a husband trying to nurture 4 relationships and more as a man circling his own pride and sense of power. So when he finally came forward, perhaps with a trembling voice and an appeal to family unity, perhaps after the public embarrassment of Coyote Pass being sold and his dreams of building 4 homes crashing into financial reality, perhaps after realizing that without Janelle's financial savvy and Meri's symbolic presence, his union with Robyn looked more like a failed experiment than a thriving plural marriage, Janelle and Meri had every reason to look him in the eye and say no, and that no carries the weight of decades, of tears shed in private, of lonely birthdays, of kids who watched their mothers fight for scraps of attention, of holidays that always seemed to circle back to Robyn's household, and of countless moments where they swallowed their own needs in the name of Kody's vision. Janelle, in particular, had spent years positioning herself as the practical one, the wife who put her head down and worked to build financial stability, who sacrificed for the family business, who invested her own money in the dream of Coyote Pass only to watch it fizzle, and who for years tolerated Kody's criticisms because she believed in the bigger picture. But after losing her son Garrison, after rediscovering her independence in North Carolina, after showing fans that she could glow without him, Janelle no longer had the energy or desire to go back into a marriage that left her drained, and for her, rejecting Kody's proposal wasn't just about closing the door on a bad relationship, it was about choosing peace, stability, and the freedom to build a new legacy with her kids and grandkids rather than once again circling the exhausting drama of Kody's moods and demands. Meri's rejection was just as powerful but carried a different flavor, because for years she clung to the hope that Kody might see her again, that the man who had declared their relationship dissolved might soften, that she could at least remain connected to the family if not fully loved, and she endured long stretches of loneliness where fans openly begged her to leave, where even her own friends questioned her loyalty to a man who had told her he no longer considered himself her husband, and yet, for years, she stayed tethered to the idea of family. But when Kody finally extended his hand in what may have been a mix of guilt and calculation, she saw through it, recognizing that he wasn't truly offering reconciliation but instead offering her the role of a placeholder, someone to strengthen his image, someone to help him regain the narrative after being publicly shamed as a husband who had lost 3 wives, and Meri, after years of healing, therapy, business ventures, and a newfound life outside of Kody's shadow, decided that this time she would not be the safety net, she would not be the woman who accepted crumbs in exchange for loyalty, and her no may have been quieter than Janelle's, more restrained, but it was firm and final, and in that moment she became not the desperate first wife clinging to the hope of attention but the independent woman who finally saw her worth. Fans who watched this unfold likely felt a mixture of shock, satisfaction, and vindication, because while many had long assumed that Janelle would walk away, Meri's rejection of Kody was the twist that proved just how far the dynamic had shifted, and together their decision created a symbolic sisterhood moment, one where two women who had once been pitted against each other, who had struggled for Kody's limited attention, who had endured jealousies and rivalries, now stood on the same side of history, united not by their devotion to Kody but by their refusal to be manipulated again, and in that shared stance they modeled something radical, that women in plural marriage, often painted as rivals or submissives, can actually become allies in reclaiming their power. Kody's reaction, though not documented in its entirety, can easily be imagined as a mixture of outrage, disbelief, and wounded pride, because a man who once managed to convince four intelligent, capable women to follow him into a shared dream now stood rejected by two of them in succession, with only Robin by his side, and even that bond looked less like romance and more like a codependent partnership built on shared fear of abandonment. And for Kody, the rejection of Janelle and Meri wasn't just personal but existential, because without them, his role as patriarch collapsed, his identity as the leader of a thriving plural family crumbled, and all that remained was the image of a man clinging to a dream that everyone else had already abandoned. What makes this moment even more layered is the way it speaks to the broader narrative of Sister Wives and its viewers. Because the show began as an exploration of a family that wanted to normalize plural marriage, to show the world that love could be multiplied, that unity could thrive, but over the years it instead became a case study in how jealousy, favoritism, financial stress, and unchecked ego can dismantle the very ideals it set out to champion. And so Janelle and Meri's rejection is not just about Kody, it's about the collapse of the myth itself, and in their refusal to go back, they also refuse to prop up a narrative that no longer serves them or the viewers. Their decision also invites speculation about what comes next, because with Janelle focusing on her health journey, her detox programs, and her work with Maddie on Tata Farms, and with Meri building her bed and breakfast business, engaging with fans online, and traveling independently, both women are carving new identities that stand apart from their years in the Brown household, and while Kody may have hoped to lure them back with promises of a reset, they instead demonstrated that they no longer need him, that their futures are not tied to whether or not he approves, and this independence resonates with fans who have cheered them on, who see in their stories a reflection of the universal struggle to walk away from toxic relationships, and who take comfort in knowing that even after decades of compromise, it is never too late to say no. In fact, the timing of their rejection could not be more symbolic, coming after the sale of Coyote Pass, after the financial unraveling of Kody's dream project, after Christine had already remarried and embraced a new life with David Woolley, and after viewers had seen Robin isolated in a mansion that looked less like a dream home and more like a gilded cage. So when Janelle and Meri finally stood up and declared themselves free, it served as the final nail in the coffin of Kody's grand vision, and in many ways, it was a gift to viewers, because reality TV thrives on closure. And this moment gave closure not just to their marriages but to years of speculation, tears, and frustration. Of course, one could argue that Kody's proposal was never truly about love or reconciliation, but about optics, about rebuilding his public image, about trying to avoid becoming the punchline of his own show, and in that sense, Janelle and Meri's rejection stings even more, because it denies him the ability to rewrite the narrative, it forces him to sit in the reality of his failures. And it elevates the women as the heroes of the story rather than the victims. Ultimately, this turning point will be remembered not for Kody's proposal but for their refusal, not for the patriarch trying to reclaim control but for the women who walked away, and it underscores a profound truth that Sister Wives has inadvertently taught its audience, that sometimes the most powerful act of love is the love you give yourself when you finally stop waiting for someone else to change. In the end, Janelle and Meri's rejection is more than just a reality TV storyline, it is a declaration of autonomy, resilience, and the enduring strength of women who have survived heartbreak and chosen wholeness. And whether or not TLC continues the series, whether or not Kody tries again to rebuild, this moment will linger as a defining chapter, a scene where two voices said no loud enough to echo through years of silence. And in doing so, they set themselves free, proving that even in the most tangled family drama, there is always room for growth, courage, and the final, liberating act of walking away.